I want to welcome everyone to the Becoming a More Age-Friendly Community event that we're having this evening. It's one of our programs that we're offering in our 2017 Age More series. So I think we'll be hosting a lot more programs along this order throughout the year. So I'm pretty excited about tonight's program because it's a pretty timely topic. And while it relates a lot to older adults, it really addresses topics that touch all of our lives in important ways, whether you're young or old or in between. And unless you've been living under a rock, you probably are very much aware that the population is aging at a pretty rapid rate. There are a lot of reasons for this. There were a lot of people born between 1946 and 1964. I bet you didn't know that. And there have been a lot of improvements in healthcare and public health, and there's more economic security, and there's a lower infant mortality rate that have made it possible for people to live longer. So right now, there's about 35 million Americans who are over the age of 65. And just for comparison, in 1900, there were, by comparison, today there's 10 times more people over 65 than there were in 1900. Almost said that backwards. And in 25 years from now, they expect that the people over 65, the number will double. So when you start talking about the aging population, one thing that often comes up is housing. And people are interested in where they're going to live and how they're going to do it and how they're going to afford it. And, are they going to be happy here or happy there? Or what are they going to do? And there are really a lot of options, and that's good because people have different needs and interests and wants. Not everybody wants the same thing, but one housing option that's becoming a lot more common is that people want to live in their own homes independently throughout their lifespan. To use a little jargon, they want to live in a lifetime community that will allow them to age in place. Now, unfortunately, most communities aren't set up in ways to facilitate aging in place, and that's really the focus of our program tonight. We're going to be looking at what lifetime communities are and how we create a lifetime community. And what I'd hope that we keep in mind throughout the program is that lifetime communities are not just for aging adults. These are age-integrated neighborhoods that promote healthy lifestyles for everyone. And they're structured in ways that expand community involvement in the local economies. There are communities that everyone who lives there comes out ahead. We are so fortunate to have an expert in this area presenting to us tonight. Zachary Benedict is here. Ta-da! And Zach is a principal at MKM Architecture Plus Design. With a fascination with the connection between people and places, his firm is consistently recognized as one of the top healthcare architecture firms in the country by Modern Healthcare magazine. With an extensive background in urban sociology, Zach is considered one of the leading voices in the lifetime community movement, focusing on socio-economic benefits of age-friendly neighborhoods. In 2015, the American Institute of Architects awarded him with the Young Architect Award in recognition of his work. Additionally, Ball State University's College of Architecture and Planning Alumni Society recognized him with the Alumni Award of Outstanding Achievement. He's the youngest individual ever to achieve that award. I think we're really, really fortunate to have him here tonight, and I'm very anxious to hear what he has to say. Please join me in welcoming Zach Benedict.
Quick update. IU 38, Iowa 31. Well, hey, we'll check it when I'm done. That's where we stand now. Hi, I'm Zach Benedict. I'm an architect from Fort Wayne, Indiana. I am a quintessential mama's boy. I grew up in a town of 800 people, and I spend the majority of my time thinking about how rural communities can figure out a rapidly aging population epidemic that many of them are facing. So I'm thrilled to be here. It's been a whirlwind of a day. We've met with city officials and planning department, and then we went and gave a lecture at the university, and now we're here. So thank you for having me. Um, and hopefully this adds some value to what you all have been thinking about for a long time, and in some ways been thinking about longer than most communities. As Linda said, my firm specializes in health and well-being. We have experts in our office that span the entire care continuum. That ranges from critical access hospitals to community health and urban planning. We have a obsession, really is maybe a good word for it, on this idea that the individual well-being is what matters to the sustainability of rural communities. And how we deliver that in the way we design and develop our communities is a responsibility of the design profession and the planning department that serves a lot of your communities. A better way of saying that is this is where I spend my time. I spend my time on both ends of the bell curve. And I get tagged as the youngest guy obsessed with old people a lot. What it really means is we're trying to understand better ways of empowering and engaging populations across the age spectrum with the theory that if I can elevate the quality of life for an older adult, I probably am going to be able to elevate the quality of life for a pre-driving teen. Those tend to be similar populations in terms of community development. So how can you do that in a way that's not only engaging, but can stimulate a local economy? So this is where I spend the majority of my time. So we talk a lot about this in terms of systems. And like every good social system, there is these quintessential tipping points, these moments throughout the timeline where a certain behavior or phenomenon crosses this specific threshold and spreads like wildfire. And these disruptive singular trends really begin to define how a generation perceives their community and their quality of life. So how can you engage that and acknowledge when these trends are occurring? So I came all the way from Indiana to give you hard-hitting data like the rise and decline of league bowling in America. But in some ways this matters, so bear with me. This is the rise and decline of league bowling. If I put up pretty much the attendance of any social organization in this country, the curve looks very similar, okay? Somewhere in the late 60s, we peaked in our participation in social organizations, and then it plummeted down to next to nothing, okay? Because somewhere in the late 60s, early 70s, in most communities, we started developing neighborhoods that made it extremely cumbersome to participate in these activities. Bowling leagues, lodge, VFW, you name it. It became hard to walk 2 blocks down to the neighborhood, third place, local pub, anything. Church attendance, they all have the similar curve because our participation in these relied on the communities in which we lived. And the reason I bring this up is because like every good curve, there's a counter curve. This is the rise of chronic disease in America. Obesity, heart disease, teenage suicide. It all almost mirrors the rise of suburban sprawl in this country. And the reason it's so important to the work we have been doing is we spend a lot of our time working with healthcare institutions, both in their specific facilities, but also in integrating preventative care within the design of the communities in which we live. And when you look at healthcare determinants, less than 20% of health outcomes have anything to do with genetics or clinical care. More than 80% have to do with social economic factors that haunt your everyday routine, right? I shouldn't be able to know how long you're going to live based on your zip code, but I can get pretty close. Right? This is a problem in community development, not healthcare. So to try to understand how we can address this, especially as we're approaching this tipping point of an aging population, is a critical time, especially for rural communities. So we have to understand and acknowledge that this is an important tipping point. And you've all seen graphs, different information, but similar scare factor. This, for instance, is the number of working age people for every elderly person in the country, this ratio of work to retiree. It used to be close to 11 to 1. By 2020, we're looking at 2 to 1. In some communities, it'll be upside down. It'll be half to 1. This is a problem, right? It's a problem on many fronts that we're going to have to address. And the communities that are hit hardest by this are the ones with the least amount of planning resources to understand and predict how they're going to react to these issues. This is Iowa in 2000. The blue are counties that have 20% or more of their population is 65 and older. Okay, right now in 2000. This is 2030. Yeah, see? Your county specifically, between 2000 and 2030, your 55 and older population grows by 162%. This is happening whether you like it or not. And you can treat this as an epidemic that needs addressed or a wonderful opportunity. Right? I work with a lot of rural Midwest communities, and I can promise them the only growing resource they have is older adults. It's the only thing I can promise you is going to grow steadily over the next 30 years. So if you can leverage it as an economic opportunity, we might be on to something. If not, we have a long, long road ahead of us. The problem is, over the last 70 years, we've extended the expected lifetime by about 20 years. And the problem, though, is everybody assumes that gets tacked on at the end, and I never really got that. Right? It makes no sense. There's not a single stitch of research I've ever seen that said a 30-year vacation was healthy. Simply not healthy. So the question is, why don't you spend 30 years to spend out your 40s? Right? This is where that 20 years should go. If I'm going to get a pick where it goes, I pick my 30s or 40s, not my 80s or 90s. Right? That's also your most active time in your lifespan in economic engagement. You're worth more to this community in your 30s and 40s than you are at any time in your life. So we just tripled that activity if we leverage it right. We just don't talk about it in these terms. The theme of the program guide was age less / age more, right? That's this. In a nutshell, the idea that aging more should be something that we all appreciate and take the opportunity to engage, as opposed to treat it like this thing that needs a social service organization to handle it. It's a big difference in understanding this as a problem versus an opportunity. One of the misconceptions is the retirement community is going to fix this. Senior services are going to be able to solve this problem. Of everyone in this country, 65 and older, between 3 and 4% actually live in age-qualified housing. You're mandated to have a certain age to live there. It's a minuscule fraction of the market. The rest of us fill out surveys saying, I'd rather die than live in a retirement community. And anybody that operates a retirement community can tell you this. Now, once they get to the retirement community, they say, I wish I would have done this 10 years earlier. But that's different. That's not the nut we're trying to crack here. The people will say very clearly, and sometimes too adamantly, that they never want to live in a retirement community. That's these people. So 3% would live in age-qualified housing. Then this issue, all these kind of scary projections of the silver tsunami of older adults is a city problem. 97% of this population isn't going to be absorbed by the care market. They're going to live in communities, and it becomes a municipal burden or a community development opportunity, depending on how you phrase it. So this is the issue, right? This is the opportunity that's in front of us. If we can get this figured out, if we can engage this type of population, it could be an economic windfall for the Midwest. We just have to figure out how to do it. The other thing that doesn't get a lot of attention, I think, is this idea of the informal care market. Informal care market's about a $470 billion industry. It's larger than Medicaid. The problem is it's treated, again, like something you do in your spare time. Most caregivers work full-time, are taking care of their parents, and their millennial children still haven't figured out how to get a job. This sandwich generation, you're taking care of both ends of that bell curve. We need to understand this because there's a lot of innovation and investment going into this market. I was just at a panel discussion at the World Bank solely dedicated to how to privatize the informal care market. How can investors get a piece of this? Because this is all unleveraged money right now. And it's going to change how we think about placemaking and community development. You don't need to know anything at all about aging in place besides watching this movie. Okay? First 6 minutes of this have no words and perfectly sums up exactly what we're struggling with. This is Carl Fredrickson, the day the Savannah Oaks retirement community came to pick him up. And it shows, I think, beautifully the connection and complexity we have in associating our identity with our home. Right? When we say I'd rather die than live in a retirement community, I don't have some weird obsession with the structure. I have some weird obsession with the memories and sense of belonging and purpose I associate with this house. And that's what I refuse to give up. So AARP asks this question every year. We really like to stay in your current residence as long as possible. And the answer is always 80, 95%. Well, who says no to that question, right? Who's lying to say yes to that question? A different question would be, what would it take for you to live in your home as long as possible? That's a totally different question. It might glean some answers to what we need to deal with as a community. The maintenance of these homes is one of the biggest problems we're facing right now. So to understand how we perceive our sense of home is really a rooted problem that we need to solve. What we find is our definition of home is this really odd overlapping of three things. Can I move around? All right. So one is the built environment, the structure itself, right? The other one is a user group. And the third is society, pop culture, everything around it. This is why I like the movie Up, right? In the first 6 minutes, all three of these things change, right? The neighborhood around the house is changing. There's construction. He refuses to sell his house. The structure itself is changing, and the user groups change. His wife dies. But whenever these three overlap, that's how I perceive home. It's a moving target. It's always moving. But where they overlap is where I feel closest to my connection to this thing I call home. And this is the thing I'd rather die than move to a retirement community for. Not that. This. Right? I've put possessive language on these things. That's my butcher, my school, my park. I own these things. And I'm not going to give them up. So we have to understand this as a global, complex network if we're going to understand how we can age in place in a meaningful way. So this issue is interesting because we've created a series of neighborhoods and communities where citizens are isolated and unable to engage the world around them. So if we're going to figure this out, we have to acknowledge this connection between place and quality of life. Right? They are forever interlinked, and we can't ignore that or refuse to acknowledge it. The interesting thing about this and what makes it a unique problem is both this idea of place and quality of life dramatically change across a lifespan. Our perception and definition of place and our definition and perception of quality life are very different from a 7-year-old to a 77-year-old. And we have to understand that we have to be nimble enough to react to both along the way. So I want to talk a little bit about what this means to have a neighborhood or a community development initiative that understands this system of attachment. This is what economic development used to look like, especially in the Midwest, right? From one Midwestern boy to a group. It was a simple system. It was an internalized system. You went to a central location to get stuff. Milk, eggs, hammers, gossip, a girlfriend. You knew where to go to get access to these things, right? Somewhere along the way, though, we traded this, by today's standards, kind of a complex system. We traded that for this. In the hopes of efficiency, we traded our internalized system for an externalized system, a destination economy where it would make it easier for people to access goods and services. And why it made it maybe a little bit more efficient to do so, what it did was it systematically removed the accidental or impromptu interaction with people, right? This model eliminates the ability to even accidentally run into somebody, unless by chance they're getting toilet paper at 3:15 p.m. at Walmart, just like I am. Besides that, I won't see them. I get in my car, I go to Walmart, I get out of my car, I go home. That's my extent of my exposure to the built environment. This has changed drastically how we perceive our communities and how we quantify our quality of life. And this development pattern is largely responsible for that. The reason I bring it up is because it matters, and we're learning a little bit more and more about how much it actually matters. I'm an architect, so I'll blame us. My profession's been really bad at this over the last 30, 40 years. We're not very good at predicting local economic growth. We say we are, but we're not. And everybody's got them. We have these ribbon cuttings, and we all high five and hug, and we think the economy is improving because we introduced 200 new jobs to the market, right? We count jobs as growth. The problem is it's usually not that proportional or predictive. If you say you introduced 200 new jobs, you probably stole 170 from a different factory, right? This is how this works. Maybe you created 30 new jobs, maybe, and that would be high. And of all those 200 people, any of them that are working outside of the county likely don't spend a dime in your county, right? They commute home and spend their money there. It's really weird because it's not predictive, it's not proportional. What we found over the last couple of years, and Knight Foundation has been really pivotal in this research, is there is one thing that's a lot more predictive in understanding local GDP growth, and that was this thing called place attachment. This idea that I would be a steward or champion of my neighborhood, my community, and I would promote it for family and friends to come live too. So assume this is the extent of our community. If we surveyed everybody and asked, how willing or likely are you to promote Iowa City as a place for a family or friend to come live to? Say that number is 50%. If over the next 5 years we can increase that from 50 to 60%, we'd likely see a 10% uptick in the GDP. It's fairly predictive because now all of you work for the Visitor and Tourism Bureau, right? You become stewards and champions of the community. And that's a lot more effective and authentic than hiring somebody with a six-figure salary to promote and market the community for people to come live in. So this idea of place attachment became a really exciting aha moment for a lot of us in understanding this because it not only was predictive, but it was associated with placemaking. It had a connotation to how we are developing and building our communities. What was exciting for me and our firm about this was it kind of proved one of our gut instincts, was that every community has got an emerging professional initiative. Why, I'm still not sure, but we all have one. I don't like, the term emerging professional is a euphemism for people that ain't professionals yet. Why emerging professionals haven't figured that out, I am not sure. And there's this myth that they have disposable income and disposable time. Most of them have neither. But nonetheless, it's a hyper-competitive game where people are competing for this population. What the place attachment research showed us was there's a much larger captive audience in engaging the unengaged that already reside in your community. Low income, older adults, minorities, marginalized populations. People that have no connection to the world around them because of the environment we have given them to live in, have no place attachment to the community in which they reside. So if you could increase just the capital demand of the residents already live in your community, you would see this enormous influx of economic activity. The problem is majority of cities and towns that we work with have kind of forgotten how to deal with these populations. Right? These are the kind of populations we treat as deviants. There's specialized housing and specialized locations, and we put them over there. Senior living goes over here, affordable housing goes over here. We have to put the school over there now. I'm still not sure why. Right? We separate all these things out in these separated uses, and then we wonder why it's so complicated to stitch them back together. So the reasons we work a lot with senior service providers is they're one of the few people that still remember what it's like to deal with some of these populations. Right? In some ways, they make really good urban planners because they know the sensitivity and the difficulties surrounding the everyday life of some of these residents. So it becomes a really interesting way to rethink economic development. And it's a more complex and I think critical discussion in rural communities. What a lot of people don't know is even in the age-friendly movement, there's a lot of interesting work being done in large metro areas because they have resources. They have good planning staff and professionals that are dealing with this on a day-to-day basis. The problem is the majority of our urban areas are actually small towns, right? Places of 25,000 or fewer make up about 80% of the country's urbanized areas. We're the normal condition. Medium, small-sized towns are what most people live. They're aging faster and have less resources to deal with these problems. So there's not a lot of energy going to this specific problem in the context of a rural community. And this is why I think this is such an important discussion. And one of the things that your community, I think, has been leading the way. The other thing I think is important from an economic development standpoint is this idea of health and well-being. So Gallup issues a report every year now, what they call the well-being index, and they rate states and communities on 5 things: purpose, social capacity, financial, community, and physical. And then they rate them. You guys aren't doing too bad. You're 19. Indiana's way over here. But you kind of see this donut in the Midwest, right? This is how we've developed our communities and what it's done to our sense of well-being. And you're on the fringe right now. So this could go either way. You could get swallowed up by the donut, or the donut hole might get a little smaller. My guess is you're going to get swallowed up by the donut if things don't change. And understanding how these wellness indicators are overtly economic development tools. These are the metrics in which we should be concerned with if we're going to understand how to engage older adults. The other thing that a lot of people don't realize is the market potential of migrating baby boomers, okay? This whole presentation is full of stereotypes, just FYI. I say baby boomers like I know, but I'll show you what the research says. Between 2000 and 2020, we expect to see about 200 million residential moves by baby boomers across the country, from metro areas to non-metro areas. This is an enormous opportunity and probably one of the largest migratory shifts in the history of our country. And they always use this cold language. So they call these people amenity-seeking migrants. Not my phrase. What this is, though, is empty nesters who are picking where they want to age in place strictly based on quality of life. They don't have to worry about a job. They don't have to worry about a good school district. Like, these are the top priorities when you're picking a residence. Empty nester baby boomers don't have to deal with these things. So now they get to pick on where they want to live. It could be because they have a good dog park, right? I mean, this is the bar of which makes me happy. This is how I'm going to make these decisions. And university towns become hyper competitive in this game, right? Hyper competitive, because they have all these things that they can offer, and I don't have to worry if I can get a good job, right? I'm not coming here for that. I'm coming here for the vibrancy and the social life and the opportunities. So it's interesting to think about this as an opportunity that your community can market itself to not only engage the unengaged already living in Iowa City, but how could you attract people within your market catchment area? The old market catchment area used to be 25 miles. You pick an address, and within 25 miles, that's how many older adults you could get and serve. They're saying now that's probably closer to a 3-hour car drive. So in Fort Wayne, that went from my market catchment being the county in which I lived to a market catchment that included Chicago, Detroit, Toledo, Cincinnati, Cleveland, Indianapolis. Completely changed what my opportunity was if I could market and brand that effectively. The problem is baby boomers don't picture retirement looking like this, right? If you do, correct me and raise your hand. Now, you picture it looking like this. And you see these. This is an ARP ad that I didn't doctor. It says, stop calling me a senior if you want my business. That's nothing new. People have been saying that for generations. This is new. I have money. I am loyal. I bring my friends. That's new. This idea that retirement is a social activity in which I bring a peer network. That's different. Me and my buddies are going to decide how we're going to retire, where we're going to retire, and you can't stop me. Big difference, right? Exponentially larger opportunity. So you have to understand this because retirement needs to be redefined. My favorite definition of retirement is by an economist named Lowell Catlett from New Mexico. He said, when I retire, I want to drink beer and work on my car all day long. I know I won't be able to drive the damn thing, but that's not the point. I worked hard, and when I retire, that's what I want to do, so give me a garage, a fridge full of beer, and leave me alone. Sure, come in, change my diaper, make sure I have a pulse, but then let me get back to changing my carburetor. And if you won't do it, I will pay for someone else to. And if I can't find anyone, I'll find friends of mine, and we'll just build our own damn garage and hire 30 full-time nurses. This is retirement, right? This is different, right? This isn't what the silent generation gave us as their ideal condition for post-workforce, right? This has demands, and there's a contingency plan of what's going to happen if I don't get what I want. Right? I want to find it somewhere, somehow. And they're looking for that authentic experience in a community just like yours, if you're willing to market it that way. So this idea of attachment is important because this is how not only we perceive the world in which we live, but it is also how we can leverage as a municipality economic activity from our residents. The problem is that attachment is solely based on this idea of perception. If I gave you all the data in the world about how active or engaged people actually are, it's different than how they actually feel. Make sense? Your perception of how engaged you are is much more important than how actually engaged you are. That doesn't matter. The key is how do you perceive that engagement, right? And that, as a planner, is what we have to be sensitive to. Designers have had a horrible time complicating this issue. The number one metric for neighborhood development is to make people happy and proud to live in the neighborhoods in which they reside. Period, end of sentence, end of story. If you can put this on a kid's face, we've all done our job, go home. Anything beyond this, I think you're overcomplicating it. And we have to understand that this is the goal, to make people happy to live in Iowa City, to be proud they live in the neighborhood they do. The problem is, as humans, we are horrible at understanding happiness. We just stink at it. We're no good. We're not rational creatures, and none of our decisions come from a place of logic or reason. I don't. And I use the example, Daniel Kahneman is a social behavioral economist, does this wonderful essay on how we perceive happiness, and he argues that we perceive it in two ways. One is from a place of memory, and one is a place of experience, and the two never agree with one another. And I think this is pretty accurate. And the thought exercise he uses is, if I gave you an amnesia pill that you had to take after a family vacation, would it change where you went? And I ask this to people, and they all say no. And then about 15 seconds later, they go, yeah, okay. Because you think about it. You think about the 6-hour car ride with kids in the back, and Sally puked in the back seat, and like all these horrible things. The experience of the vacation might have been horrible, but the memory of it was fantastic, right? We don't pick vacations based on experience. You make a predetermined list of memories you want to shove down your kid's throat. This is how you pick vacations. This is what you do. And then, by God, we're going to give you these memories. This is why, what do you say before you take a photo? That assumes no one's smiling at the time you took the photo. It's proof that the experience wasn't that enjoyable. We forced everyone to smile because we want the record of the memory to prove we are all having a good time, even if it's against their will. This is this constant battle of experience and memory, right? And as we age, this idea of aging in place in our home, is the experience I have in my home at 85 good? No, probably not. Is the memory good? Oh yeah, sure. Yeah, I have so many good memories in this home that I would refuse to give up. Is the experience cumbersome right now? Yeah. I'm not willing to get rid of the memories though. So this might be our experience at a beach vacation, right? But it's probably our memory, right? Our experience could have looked like that. And assuming Timmy's okay, I'd argue both of these families in 20 years have the same memory, assuming he's okay. The experience might have been drastically different, but the memory tends to level out. And we have to understand this constant battle, this inner battle we have between memory and experience, is what makes aging in the communities we live in now so complicated. The problem is, and you're seeing this, I think, now with some of these livable communities, is one of the greatest hurdles preventing older adults to usher in this renaissance of civic activity like we're talking about, is this articulation of a new vision of life. The demand by baby boomers is outpacing the construction of the product they want. There's so many people wanting this product and so few opportunities to actually get it. So we're finding people moving nationwide to find a product that they think fits their expectation of retirement. The problem is we ask people what they want and then we listen to them, which isn't always necessarily a good thing. Because we don't, I'll just say it, we lie a lot on focus group questions. And the example I give is coffee. If you pool a whole room full of coffee drinkers and ask them what kind of coffee they drink, the vast majority of them are going to say some version of a dark, rich, hearty roast. Okay? That's what almost everybody will say is the kind of coffee that they enjoy. That's about 25% of the coffee drank in this country. Most of us like our coffee milky and weak. That's the truth. Just have the same ring to it when someone asks you in a job interview, how you like your coffee, milky and weak. It just doesn't have the same. You want to say that you like a dark, rich, hearty roast. It has a different ring to it. It says that you're independent. You like microbreweries and this craft coffee stuff. And you don't. Starbucks has made a fortune on this. You get your dark, rich, hearty roast coffee, and you turn around to the sugar station, and you just dump as much cream and sugar in it as possible. Like, they know you're going to do that. This is the problem. If we listen to everybody that said they go to church on Sunday, we're about 50% short on pews. But why lie to the guy on the phone who's asking? It's none of his business, and I don't want mom to know that I skip church every now and then. Right? We don't answer these questions truthfully. We answer them how we think they should be answered. The prime example is, why do older adults not use trail systems? My hip hurts, my knee hurts. No, it's not. It's because they don't have public restrooms. But you don't say that in a survey. That's none of your business. But that's why they don't. So you can't listen to the survey all the time. Right? There has to be more teeth behind the research of why these spaces, places, and services aren't being utilized. And you can't rely simply on black and white questions because there's more complexity to it than that. But we can talk about this in terms of perception. So this is one of my favorite studies. This took a whole series of questions that they asked 65 and older citizens, and they separated out two cohorts, and they asked them all the same question. Dark yellow are people that consider themselves to have a high level engagement in the world around them. We didn't measure it, we didn't quantify it, we just asked them, do you think you are highly engaged in your community? And they said yes. These people consider themselves to be a low level of engagement. Again, didn't measure it, but that's what they see when they look in the mirror. Then we separated them out and asked them specific questions like, are you satisfied with your life the majority of the time? You see a 30% drop in those willing to say yes to that question just by separating these two populations. These are philosophical questions. Do you have a high quality of life? 40% drop. Just on the perception of engagement. So this idea of engaging the unengaged is critical to how we perceive our quality of life. And this, at the end of the day, is something that community planning and development needs to address. Because where we live changes how we live. Always has, always will. This is a photo that was published before we went up to a design exercise in Michigan to talk about streetscapes. We met this gentleman. He does this every morning before he goes to the gym to exercise. We met him, good guy, able-bodied guy, nothing wrong with him. In his defense, look beyond the car, what do you see? No sidewalks, no street furniture, no signage, right? This road was designed to drive a dog down. And that's the behavior you get. Design has its implications as a behavioral system. We have done this to ourselves. We know this because we've studied it. There's these things called naturally occurring retirement communities, NORCs. It's just a euphemism for a good street. But what happens is when you name something, you can study it. So when we relocate people from the suburbs to a NORC, we find 84% participate in more activities, 95% know more about their community, 70% say they feel healthier. We know good neighborhoods do this to us. ARP launched last year, year and a half ago, Livability Index, which took the walk score, which was a great website, and transformed it into a livability index. You can put any address in the country here, give you a normalized score of 0 to 100, how livable it is, right? Developers are catching on. They know there's a market here. World Health Organization had the age-friendly cities, which this county, I think, is familiar with. Fair? Okay. And I'm not going to go through this. This is great information you can get online. But we're starting to understand rules, regulations, best practices of what this looks like. And then this is a slide that I use a lot, but it's also in your city's comprehensive plan. This is Project for Public Space's definition of what makes a good space. And there's 4 core tenets to this. Good spaces have to be social, active, accessible, and comfortable. Right? This is not rocket science. The difference is this is normally a discussion that we have around a 25-year-old egomaniac with a car. Right? This looks a very different space if I say it has to be sociable, active, accessible, and comfortable to a 95-year-old. Right? And we have to start to look at it through that lens. So I'm going to show some examples of what this means, this idea of inclusion, and then we'll open it up for discussions. How are we doing on time? Okay, I got to hurry. This is my favorite example. Everybody's seen this show. Fair assumption? Okay. This is the first time we used the television as a teaching tool. Right? Jim Henson, in his infinite wisdom, thought that latchkey children could be best reached through an educational television program. So he worked with a team at Stanford to try to develop the best educational programming on television. And they went through a series of case studies, time studies like Toyota, and they would fill an interrogation room full of toys on the floor and a tube TV console on the floor. And they'd run pilot episodes of Sesame Street. If kids acted engaged, they'd score it, time it, log it. As soon as they disengaged, started playing with a toy, score it, time it, log it. And then when they got re-engaged by the TV, score it, time it, log it. Okay? You ever notice Oscar the Grouch doesn't teach you numbers and letters? He's too interesting. Kids don't remember a thing he says. You know why Oscar's there? Because you need to rest, but I don't want you to leave. Right? He's comic relief. So, Sesame Street is systematically designed around the intellectual stamina of a 4-year-old. If anybody's got 4-year-olds, you know how hard that is. But I can get you for 2 minutes, and we got to rest. I can get you for 2 minutes, and we got to rest. And then I can get you for 6. We got to rest. 2, we got to rest. Those rests, that's when you see Oscar. This is how the Midwest defines walkability. I am assuming, I don't know this for a fact, but I'm willing to bet, parking is a huge issue in downtown Iowa City, because if you can't park within at least 7 feet of the place I'm headed to, I'm mad. I'm upset. We need more parking. Right, exactly. That's because throughout the course of your lifetime, a walk longer than 7 minutes didn't have a lot of Oscar time in it. Right? There was no intellectual stamina needed for that walk. If you get a walk a mile away from a Broadway show in Chicago, you brag about that spot all the way home. Because that walk from wherever you parked to wherever the play is part of the date. Sometimes it's the best part of the date. Right? But your walk in a stinky, nasty Walmart parking lot has a different quality to it. Doesn't feel the same, doesn't act the same. There's no Oscar time in that walk. So we have to understand not only do our perception of walkability based on our intellectual stamina, it's also based on our physical limitations. American Planning Association says you can walk 3/4 of a mile in 15 minutes. Yeah, maybe if you're in college. Not when you're 80. A 10-minute walk for an 80-year-old is about 1,500 feet. That's 5 city blocks. So that's as long as I could physically walk in 10 minutes. Not to mention, what if the walk stinks? I'm not willing to walk that far. So this idea of Oscar becomes, I think, a planning principle around this idea of what Gladwell called stickiness. Sesame Street learned how to make the television sticky. I couldn't stop looking at it. And we need to understand how to make neighborhoods stickier for older adults and pre-driving teens. Right? We're not good at it right now. We've forgotten how to make neighborhoods sticky. And the problem is the communities that will succeed with this rapidly aging population are those that understand and appreciate that this idea of stickiness is not a novel idea. It's core to the economic sustainability of the communities in which we live. So the example I use for all of our work, I'll show some examples and then I'll shut up, is a potato peeler. All the work we do at my firm are potato peelers. This is the OXO potato peeler. Everybody got one of these at home? Yeah, see, everybody does now. Remember the old ones? Those metal ones that hurt your hands so bad? Yeah? Some of us remember them, some of us don't. Now everything has that shape. Everything. This was designed by a lead designer at IDEO for his arthritic grandmother. Okay? In OXO's defense, maybe to their credit, they didn't market this as a geriatric kitchen utensil. That would have been marketing suicide, right? It's one of the #1 selling product on wedding registries. Right? If you're in the market for a potato peeler, this is the sexiest one you can buy. And this, I think, is a perfect metaphor for what good design means. There's a lot of science behind this product. There's a reason this handle is oblong and not round, reason this is 0.72 inches and not 0.75. All this is designed to reduce cutting yourself by like 98%. And I hope you never notice it. I hope you pick this thing up, peel a potato, set it down, never think twice about it. Right? I don't want credit as a designer for why this works for people from ages 7 to 107. Right? I just want the product to work for someone that is 107. So think about this at the city level. I don't want you to give me credit as a designer why this street is perfect for older adults. We've completely not done our job if that's the case. I want older adults to walk down that street and not think twice about it. That's the difference. So when we talk about potato peelers, we're talking about inclusivity as the bare metric, the baseline competency of good planning and design. My favorite example of this is Mather's Cafe. This is there's 5 or 6 of these on the outskirts of Chicago. It's run by the Mathers Foundation. This is a senior center disguised as a Starbucks. The word senior appears nowhere. Staff's giving a list of words they're not allowed to say, like senior. They have to call them people. Staff's incentivized by how many backstories they can memorize, right? Like every good bartender. Right? It's your job. Yeah, I know you make soup. It's your job to understand that Joe comes here every Thursday at 2 o'clock. Okay? It's also your job to know Sally comes here every Thursday at 2:15 to pretend like she ain't here for Joe. That's your job. It's also your job to realize and notice when Joe hasn't come for 2 weeks. It's also your job to remind Sally to go check on Joe. This is your job as a Mathers employee. They're reminding people what it's like to actually live in a real neighborhood. Is it a senior center? No. Is it a coffee shop? No. Is it a place people care about each other? Yeah. We have to understand that this is economic development. We have to understand and subsidize this behavior. You're starting to understand this as a city. You're implementing a whole series of form-based codes, which is a whole bunch of stuff that looks like this. Right? You're telling people how to develop spatially and not by use. In this area, things have to look this way, this tall, this far away from the street. The question is, on top of this, can you overlay wellness index? Can we require in our form-based code that we offer things about intellectual and cognitive impairment, environmental cues, physical limitations, professional and vocational services? Can we put this embedded in our form-based code? And we've started to do this with a lot of communities we're working with. The Lifetime Communities District movement really has 4 pillars. We're interested in living, buying, working, volunteerism. This is the core tenets of livable community. Housing's easy, it comes in all shapes and sizes. Buying power is relying on that Mathers Cafe mentality. Working is an interesting one. Over somewhere 60% of the workforce growth in the next 10 years is 55 and older. And volunteerism. Ask any foundation in your city right now if they're worried about transfer of wealth. This idea that brain drain, all the kids leave, where do you think your estate goes? You think it stays in Iowa? No, it goes wherever they live. Unless I have attachment to the place in which I live. Then my ability to change where that money goes raises by 200%. Right? I'm twice as likely to give a portion of that estate to the community in which I live as opposed to let it go to where my children now reside. So we start to understand this and try to develop community development patterns that are sensitive to these things. And I think the whole hope is that this is a potato peeler. There's a lot of science behind this. I hope you never notice. Right? There's a reason that this is 6 feet and not 4. The reason this has to be here, here has to be here. That I hope you never notice. I just hope it's really functional for people across the age spectrum. I think also use is important, not just space. And how we develop areas in a way that incentivizes specific programs and initiatives. This is the Scholar House. This is Section 42 HUD housing, but it comes with a carrot that if the single mother is working full or part-time and going to school full or part-time, they'll throw in free daycare. The hope is that you can raise people out of poverty 2 generations at a time. Right? This is a requirement we're putting on developers, not feeling lucky when we get one that knows what they're doing. My favorite passion in the world is public libraries because they're wonderful level setters. All ages, all abilities, all incomes. Public libraries are the one sustainable institution in your community that can check all those boxes. And I can go on for days about libraries, so I will quit. The last thing we're doing, and I think this is relevant to you all, is the Pfizer Foundation asked us to think about a prototype for communities of all ages and abilities. And we got selected to use Bloomington, Indiana as the case study. Similar size community, college town. And what we found was they were on the right path, but what we developed was an overlay zoning district, so essentially a form-based code. But within it, we said if the community is going to give any subsidy or incentive to developers, they owe us something. And what they owe us is to safeguard us against our own demographic shifts. So if we're going to give you a tax credit, if we're going to give you TIF funding, you have to develop for us the ability to provide every resident within the district has to be within 1,500 feet of fresh produce, which is really tough. You don't have to do it, but if you want my money, you do. Everything has to be walkable. And what we did is, this was a Rails to Trails program. Along that trail, we put these little micro libraries. They're like bookmobiles with no wheels. And what that provided us along the trail every 1,500 feet, this 10-minute walk, was a public library-ish, sort of, a Wi-Fi hotspot, public restrooms, and a familiar face. The librarian got on her bike and rode back and forth. They couldn't afford to do book delivery for books, so you could order them and have them shipped to your little kiosk. And they became how you organize the trail. Not going to solve the world's problems, but it's a start, right? And if we as communities are going to have these public-private partnerships, we get what we pay for. And we need to have a stronger stance on what we want out of communities. And what we want is a place where people can thrive across the lifespan. What we're trying to do is change the perception. Health and well-being is a civic right, not a social service. And we have to demand that the way our communities are developed, recognize and acknowledge that. Because if we don't, I think you're on an unsustainable track between now and 2030. So that's all I had for tonight. I open up for questions. How do we do on time? Oh, okay, not too bad.
Thanks very much, Zach. College Town, obviously a sort of a mecca for what you're talking about. Problem is, there's a group of younger people that not that age, but 20-somethings that are competing for the same space. A lot of us would like to live near downtown so we could walk to downtown, walk to Java House or whatever, walk to performances. But we're competing for space with people that are willing to live at a much higher density than we are, and they are subsidized by their parents. The result is two things. One, they pay more for the space than we care to or can afford to. And secondly, we don't like living near them because they make a lot of noise at 3 a.m.
It's a good problem to have. I mean, it's better than not having that problem, for sure. But it is a problem. But I'd separate the two cohorts. So there's people that are locals, live in Iowa City, and are aging here now, have a different sensitivity of what they want and how they want to live, versus people that are looking at Iowa City on their radar as a place to relocate to. Locals tend to be a lot more anti, what do you call them? College kids, right? And think there's not a value there to pay a premium. Where that horrible phrase, amenity-seeking migrants, largely money is not an option, or it's no issue. They're looking for a place where they can age in place and have the money and resources to do so. So there is a difference there. The other thing I think is important to realize is nobody wants to live around people their own age. Old isn't a thing you catch. It's not like cancer. It's like my friend said, here's a picture of me when I'm younger. Every picture of you is of you when you're younger, right? It's a gradual thing. So you don't just get old. It's not you wake up one day and like, oh man, I'm old. It doesn't happen that way. Old is, research says, about anybody that's about 12 years older than you. That's who old is. So average entry age to retirement community is like 82. And the biggest complaint they get is, well, that's fine. Just don't put me next to the old people. Because there's people that are like 95, and I don't want to be near them. They're depressing. They're old. And this is the thing you have to juggle is the best thing you have going from you from the outside looking in is I have a high probability of being around people a lot younger than me. As an empty nester looking for a place to age in place. It's a huge problem here as a local resident because you've been dealing with it for a long time. You're used to it. But it's a huge asset from a marketing standpoint because the probability or likelihood that I'll be stuck with people my own age on my block is pretty low. So yeah, it's a really hard problem, especially from a policy standpoint, to fight that gentrification at that age bracket. But it's a wonderful opportunity to have. It's a good problem to have. Yeah, it's a safety issue too. It completely agree. But you could have worse problems.
How do you provide diversity between all and have a good community? I live in a unit that we have all ages, and I find that I enjoy the diversity and the different ethnic that I wouldn't have if I didn't have this particular community to live in. It has become a community in itself, but we all work in that community to help each other. And I think that's what diversity has to be. It has to be a helping of each other. But how do you provide that in a community?
Well, it's hard to mandate. It's hard to say we're going to have a policy that requires that we're diverse. But I think what you'll find is, I would assume there's parallels to Indiana. In Iowan terms, I assume you're a very diverse community versus the state. Right, yeah, right, yeah. Everybody's looking at me, I was like, yeah, you have to be. And what you'll find is people that have a higher level of attachment to Iowa City are ones that value diversity. So those that are moving here or those that will fight to stay share those common values. And it's a much more sustainable way to go at the problem from the bottom up than the top down. There are things you can do from a policy standpoint. You can have inclusivity clauses and manifestos that your chamber and council can support. And those are great. We're trying to do it right now in Northeast Indiana as a region because Indiana's got a bad rep for inclusivity right now. And it's a huge issue for our economy. Enormous issue. It was a catastrophe when we tried to pass RFRA. It was an enormous problem. So in terms of a regional standpoint, you likely have a reputation of being one of the most welcoming and diverse communities in the state. That reputation is something you should protect dearly and talk about every chance you get. And this is that idea of place attachment, when everybody becomes a steward and champion of the community. What they find is, again, these decisions don't come from logic and reason. When people say that schools are the number one reason people relocate to your communities, they don't do any empirical data on if the school's good. They don't check your graduation rates, teacher surveys. You know what they do? They drive around your school on a Saturday and see how well the lawn's maintained. No. If there's weeds, it must be a horrible school. If the manicured lawn is perfect, that place has its act together. Okay? This is how we make these decisions. So if I'm shopping for a home in Iowa City and I stop at 3 coffee shops to scope out the neighborhood and I get a sense of a diverse community, then I think, okay, that's much more successful than you have a brochure that says you're a diverse community. Like, we make these decisions in a split second on a Saturday afternoon with a cranky spouse. Like, this is how you make these decisions to relocate. And the more you can have that diversity, that community and camaraderie on the street for all to see, the better off you'll be.